Hello again, Sandwich. I'm Greg Anderson. Welcome back to this month's Ask the Sup, my one-on-one discussion with Sandwich School Superintendent, Dr. Joe Maruszczak. You're still a doctor, right?
Last time I checked, yes. They haven't taken my license away.
Thank God. Thank you for contributing to our content by sending in your questions at askoursuperintendent@gmail.com. So we've got a lot of things to talk about. Dr. Joe, welcome back.
Great to be back.
And you are fresh on the heels of a nice play that you saw a couple days ago.
The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, done by Knights Theater Company. This past weekend and going into this coming weekend, which, let me do some quick math. What is it, the 16th and the 17th?
Yeah.
So terrific. As always, the Lassets, Kevin and Melinda, what they get out of our kids is nothing short of phenomenal.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I used to do high school plays when I was in school.
Really? You have a penchant for drama?
Oh, well, yes, you got that right.
Yeah.
I loved it. You know me. I mean, we talked about this with TV last time. I love that sense of performance for a kid who just is like itching to do that.
Sure.
And I'm sure, I didn't see the show, but I'm sure there was just kids all over that stage that were just in their glory.
Absolutely. And just, again, I can't say enough about the Lassets, particularly with regard to just the culture that they develop amongst the KTC kids. They are a very, very tight-knit group of kids. And I think part of it is just the journey. And it's the climate and the culture that's created by the production.
Great. Excellent. Okay. Got a lot of stuff to go over with you, and I always say this: it's wonderful that you come in here. You don't ask to see any of the questions
I do not.
that I come up with that I make up, frankly, or that people send in. You don't ask, and I appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about school safety. That came up in a recent Sandwich School Committee meeting. But let's start with, you have a new school resource officer, Doctor. Is he a doctor as well?
He is not.
No.
He's terrific, but he has not earned his doctoral degree yet. It's Officer Mark Peterson.
Yeah.
And, he's homegrown. Class of 2014 from Sandwich High School.
Nice.
Also went to Westfield State. And I think he had a brief tenure on the Orleans police force, but I think he's been here in Sandwich for at least the last couple of years or so.
Okay. What does the school resource officer do day to day?
Day to day, it is really just having a visible presence in the schools, kind of assisting with some of the operational pieces that you would think public safety. Usually they're involved in, helping with the traffic of pickup and drop off at all three schools. But they also work really closely with our school's admin team, each school's admin team, in very much a proactive role. We will also use them when we have a thorny situation that could have legal implications.
Drugs in the schools.
Or unfortunately, if you have a situation that involves abuse in the home and how it's, as mandated reporters, when we hear of that information, there's usually a connection there. We'll also use them for, it has legal implications, but nothing that serious. When you've got chronic absenteeism and a student may be truant, and every once in a blue moon we might have an issue around residency where somebody doesn't live in our community anymore, but they're still sending their student to the Sandwich Public Schools. So as a result, we check to ensure residency.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pragmatic applications of how they're being used.
Yeah. Interesting. Let's talk about the night lock.
Mm-hmm.
The night lock is a barricading door system. I'm changing the subject if you haven't noticed.
Very, very slick with that segue.
It was quick. It was quick. So the night lock is a door barricading system that is a device that a school system or probably any office building setting could acquire. You guys wanted it in the schools. The
Sure.
Sandwich building commissioner, Brendan Brides, had said it doesn't meet code.
Sure.
It was appealed. The decision was upheld, meaning you're not going to get the night locks in there. I mean, I don't want to talk about a product and how beautiful it is, but tell me a little bit about why that was so important. Is there anything in place right now that would replicate? And what's the plan to barricade some of these classrooms in those horrific, God hope they never happen moments?
Sure. Great questions. I would say at this juncture, it's not over in the sense that that last appeals hearing before the State Architectural Appeals Board, it was kind of established that even though the product has the name quote unquote night lock, it is not a lock per se. It's actually a barricading device. And it's a barricading device that's very much consistent with the protocols known as ALICE that we've been using and training our staff with. And I view it in this context, Greg, that if you can have a device that assures the safety and of our students and our staff, that it's just one more measure. I don't care if it's a 1%er or a 2%er. I think it's really significant for the assurances and the peace of mind of our staff, our families, and our kids that we have something like that intact. So what's the code conflict? So the original piece, at least my understanding of it, Greg, was concerns over folks that may be disabled, particularly if you are wheelchair bound, where it's a device that's installed through the floor, the locking mechanism. So concerns over somebody who would be in a wheelchair, could they actually physically get down to undo it? And then specifically, the state building code talks about any type of locking device should be with just one motion to lock and unlock, whereas this is two motions. The counter to that is, again, this isn't a lock per se that is always used. It's only used in extraordinary circumstances, and again, it's a barricading device. I think the school department also countered with, for a student or even a staff member who would be in a wheelchair, it's not like they're alone. They're ever in a situation where they would be alone and so on. So I think, without getting, and I'm not intentionally trying to be evasive or anything, I think there's still an ongoing dialogue about all of this and looking at every potential option. But I do want to impress upon the point that Chris George, who's our director of facilities, who's put a lot of time, energy, and effort into this and is pretty passionate about this topic, he has very much viewed it in the context of safety. And if the school district can do absolutely anything to ensure the safety of our kids and safety of our staff, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
So the conversation goes on.
Yeah. And tell me what ALICE is, for those who don't know. You said that is a system you already have in place.
Sure. It is, sometimes there is another kind of loose expression, but it's essentially run, hide, fight. It is teaching students and also staff members around situational awareness of if there's an intruder or a potential shooter and so on, that in all cases, maybe lockdown is not the best procedure. Maybe you should be evacuating.
Right.
Maybe if worse comes to worse, you should be, the C stands for counter. You should do everything in your power that if you do have an intruder coming in the classroom, that you do take measures to counter the force and so on. So in doing safety drills and some of the safety drills that we've got moving forward, you do some different types of combinations. So picture a place like the high school where maybe you're going to have certain wings go into lockdown, but other wings evacuate and meet at a rallying point and so on, because that's the smartest strategy for some type of intruder event.
Yeah. And you do regular, not rehearsals, but
we refer to them as safety drills. And the mindset of our district safety team, and we meet once a month, is how do we consistently move the ball down the field? And it is trying to create drills that have a higher degree of sophistication and complexity. If you really, really think about this, teachers didn't sign up for this type of thing.
Right.
And I think that there is a component that goes with this that we've got to assure our staff, but we also have to have drills to help increase their confidence in decision making, in making those snap type decisions of what is in the best interest for safety and well-being of my kids and myself. And that takes time. If you think about it, going back in the day, when we were still in school, we practiced things like fire drills, what they look like. I think this falls in that similar milieu where we've got to practice this to kind of build our memory muscle, so to speak.
How disconcerting it is that back when we were in school, we never had active shooters.
No.
I mean, the dynamic of today's culture and the risks out there are just...
It's horrible.
It's horrible.
It's simply horrible. It is, it shouldn't be.
Let me change the subject and talk about school absenteeism. You spoke about this at the last school committee meeting. The definition of chronic absenteeism is about 10% or 10% of a student missing
18 days out of the school year,
18
10%.
days.
Yeah.
So like 3 weeks-ish.
A little more than that.
A little more
three
than
and a half.
weeks.
Yeah.
Obviously, during the pandemic, it skyrocketed.
Sure.
Beyond charts, almost its own bucket. But now it's about recovery right now. Where do we stand on absenteeism against the state? My understanding from what you were saying is we're better. But why is this so important to you, aside from the obvious that you need kids in class? Why is this so important?
When push comes to shove, if kids are not present, how can they learn? How can they meet the standards? How do they progress with regard to reading, writing, and basic problem solving, and so on? And particularly in those early grades, the interesting piece of data was our highest chronic absenteeism rates were not at the high school; they were at Forestdale, and there's a lot of
that.
Why do you think? Some of the feedback that I've gotten has been, think about it. Forestdale is pre-K through 2. Pre-K and K are not compulsory. They're not mandated. So I think there could be naturally a feeling of, hey, I can take my kindergarten out and we can go on a vacation to Disney or whatever, and it's not really a big deal. So I think there's the element of that, but I also think, and this is part of the larger gestalt of this problem. The pandemic, I think, has inherently changed people, and it's changed priorities. It's changed how we work. I think it's probably not a stretch to say that we've got more parents now that are working remotely or have some type of hybrid system, so that if their child is sick, it's a lot easier to stay home with your kid versus saying, I got to get daycare now, and so on. So I think it's not just one thing, it's several things. Yes, we're better than the state average, and 22-23 represented a significant improvement over 21-22, but we still have a ways to go to get back to where we were pre-pandemic.
You had stated that school culture and kind of that, these are my words, not yours, but that sense of connectedness, bringing kids to want to be in school can help with that absenteeism. That seems nice and wonderful, but is it enough if you're really trying to keep kids in school? Is it just that, or
I would say it's that, but it's also having engaging instruction. That think about kind of to cycle back to what we started about, KTC. Those kids, not to speak for all of them, but I feel pretty comfortable saying this, probably the high point of their day is when they're able to connect with Melinda Lassett and, be in an after-school rehearsal, or say they're part of Sandwich Soul or the advanced show choir, and they're meeting there. It's a social thing, but it's also really, really highly engaging. It's what they're passionate about. And I know we've got, a lot of teachers across our district that really connect with kids. So yes, there's that sense of belonging, but also what they're doing with kids, the instructional methodologies that they choose to really, really kind of rope kids in and engage them is also huge as well.
It's really true. When I was thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about when, it sounds silly, but when I was in plays, that after school thing, I would think about it all day long. And then I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to be with our scripts and we're going to be goofing off. And sports can have that same
exact thing.
Component.
Interesting. Yeah.
Talking about measurements, MCAS. It's the gold standard in Massachusetts to measure whether or not there is performance or not in the school. General question to you, with the pandemic's impact on learning loss and MCAS being what it is, do the two speak to each other, and is MCAS truly that gold measure for you to be able to say our kids are doing well, especially when you look at the complexities of today's student?
Great question. I think it is just one measure. It's an important measure, but it's only one measure, and it's a snapshot in time. Is it the end-all, be-all? No. I think it definitely could be a more effective test that was a little bit more performance-based in measure. For example, this year in grades 5 and 8, they are doing a field test of the science test, where kids will actually work in groups and actually do kind of a rudimentary experiment and then have to report their data and analyze their data and so on. Think about how much more effective and meaningful of a test that is versus kids bubbling in things on a sheet and kind of answering some rote questions about cell function and structure.
Right.
So do I think the test is important? I do. Do I think it has evolved and needs to evolve a little more, to be a little more advanced? I do. And I also think that we need to look at, can we come up with more of a staggered schedule? Why do we have to test every kid grades 3 through 8 and 10? And actually, in defense of the State Department of Education, something that I say very rarely, their hands are tied by the feds, because if you go back to 2002 and No Child Left Behind, it actually mandates those annual tests in English language arts and math to all students in grades 3 through 8.
So is there an appetite on the state level to get a lot more creative with testing?
Absolutely. I can speak for our Superintendents Association, very much so. And again, not to speak for every superintendent, because I'm sure that there's a continuum of viewpoints, but I think most people are looking for kind of a wider breadth and depth of how we ascertain how well our kids are meeting standards.
Yeah, interesting. Changing the subject again, the middle high school, the disruption with Mr. Mulcahy and the leave of absence, that's obviously an HR issue, but it also speaks to culture, and it's been disruptive. How much of a distraction has this been for you?
In what sense?
Just as it relates to making sure that middle high school is efficient, it's doing what it needs to do, it's not distracted.
I think I'm extremely fortunate, and the district is extremely fortunate in having Jeannie Nelson as the acting principal, in the sense that she is really, really respected and has a certain degree of gravitas, because she has worked there as a teacher, as a department head, as an assistant principal, and is very much viewed by the staff as somebody who gets things done and is efficient and really is very kid-centered and has students' best interests at heart. I think if it was a situation where there wasn't somebody like that in-house, it would be markedly more challenging.
Yeah, got it. Okay. I mentioned this to you earlier, and it's a question I've always wondered about, which has to do with kind of that book banning topic. You know, there's questionable content on the shelves in the library, and in the October 18th school committee meeting, somebody had addressed a book in the 6th grade library. I'm frankly not interested in that book and that particular situation. I'm more interested in process. How does a school system, and how do you guide that whole discussion of what is appropriate, what isn't? If someone brings up a book and says, this is just blasphemy, how does that get handled?
Another great question, and it's interesting because a lot of times it happens very much at the grassroots level, where a parent will object to a book. Usually it's the first line to the classroom teacher. Sometimes it makes its way to the principal, and then it can come to central office, to my office, or to the assistant Supt or the curriculum director. And I think it is kind of a balancing act, in the sense that, you know, the decision of what is appropriate for the curriculum is in the domain of teachers and the school administrators, really the educators in the district. The flip side of that, though, is we do very much want to work with parents in partnership, and kind of work with the community and kind of know what the community norms are. So I think the scenario that you were alluding to, there was an objection to a library, a book that was in a classroom library. And I think it was a situation where we started up till grade 6 with a new literacy series. And part of the value of this literacy series is that it gives every single classroom like this really deep collection of books for their classroom library, something like 200 titles, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
I think the balance is in being transparent about it, and our plans are to put on our district website, what are all the titles? I've asked, Dave Quinn and Jen Kirk, who are our assistant superintendent and curriculum director, we need to ensure that we kind of do a vetting of it in addition to what the textbook publisher provides us. I think, I had the opportunity myself to meet with the parents that had some objections, and their take was more around thinking about the appropriateness of material for a certain grade level or a certain age level.
Right.
And I understand that, and I respect that.
Yeah.
And again, I kind of apply a fair and reasonable-minded approach to it. I say to myself, okay, what would a fair and reasonable-minded person think of this?
Right.
And so on.
Right. Have you had to pull any books in your career?
I can't think of any.
Yeah.
I really can't. And I think this has become a thing because of just the remarkably polarized times that we're living in.
It's funny you say that, because I was thinking of diversity, equity, and inclusion and that whole topic. And I know people in my life who think that that is bunk. They don't want their kid to be learning all of this stuff. And there are others who say, oh my gosh, we need to be a much more inclusive, community. So it makes me think of not just the literature, but curriculum, but also just how Greg, the teacher, is speaking about history or speaking about, can I, as a teacher, inadvertently cross a line where a student goes home and says, Mr. Anderson was talking about X, Y, and Z. Do you deal with a lot of that? Like, is there that polarization? Has it resulted in people saying, damn it, don't talk to my kids about this?
We've, last school year, we put out a pretty comprehensive survey to all of our 7th and 8th grade parents. I also put out a survey. Well, it was actually kind of more of a Google form. I started this past month a family and community advisory committee, and we just a week ago had our first meeting, and kind of even asking questions. Hey, why are you interested in being part of this team? What do you feel like's the work, and so on. And it is kind of interesting because you're bringing people together, and there's some folks that very candidly say, hey, this district needs to do a lot more with respect to DEI. I want to make sure that all of our kids have a strong sense of belonging and they're included, and so on. Then you'll have some folks who say, enough is enough. I feel like my kid is being indoctrinated, and can't we just stick to reading, writing, and arithmetic?
Right.
I think the reality is somewhere in between, in the sense that I always go back to part of our mission is to ensure that every single child, and therefore their family, have a deep sense of belonging to the district.
Yeah.
I get it with regard to perceptions around there's some type of political agenda being forwarded, and I don't think the district should be doing anything that even gives that perception. So it takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of really high quality two-way communication so people don't have that feeling.
Do you have some principals who have been accused? Accused is such a crazy, strong word, but has this risen to the principal level that you know of? Parents who say, "I want to talk to you. This isn't cool."
Yeah, I'm cognizant that it's happened.
Yeah.
A very, very small number of times on my watch, but I'm
Okay.
sure it's happened prior
Yeah.
to me coming into the district. Yeah, absolutely.
Last thing I wanted to talk to you about, and this warrants a police song, "Message in a Bottle."
Isn't that amazing?
Come on.
Sending out an SOS.
Yeah, see, actually, I was not encouraging you to sing.
Yeah, but
What a
probably
wild story.
if this was 1983, I would be in KTC. I was part of the Agawam High School show choir.
I would be singing "Take on Me."
Great song.
All right, so come on, this kid does this in 1987.
1997.
1997.
97.
Yeah.
And the young man is now 37 years old.
Have you been in touch with him?
I have not. I did, very hacky. I did this all through Google Translate. But I reached out to the gentleman that found the bottle in French,
Mhm.
gave him this whole rap about that I was superintendent of the district, and I would really love to connect with him with the mindset that how powerful would it be to do a Skype
Yeah.
between him and our French students at the high school. But I haven't heard back.
Oh, wow. Now, are you sure? So you had to translate that.
I did.
Are you sure you didn't offend him with
I'm
some
sure
reference about his
I
mother?
did not,
or
and
something?
I admit it. It's totally hacky to use Google Translate for something like that. But I had no clue whether this,
Yeah. So do you?
parlez-vous anglais?
Yeah. Spanish, right?
See.
Yeah. So do you still have kids polluting the ocean right now, dropping bottles?
To my knowledge, we do not. I
Okay.
think that lesson is definitely passé.
Yeah.
But I just read, I think just over the weekend, there's a piece in People magazine about this.
Are you kidding me?
The gentleman who was the teacher at Forestdale back in the day, they got a hold of him, and supposedly they have found bottles in the UK and Morocco.
From him?
Yes,
his
from the
class?
kids.
Good
You
Lord.
can't make this stuff up.
Jeez. I'm telling you, if I dropped something in the water and it ended up in Edgartown, I would be feeling like, oh my gosh, how did this
Wow,
happen?
I've done something really meaningful here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, fantastic. It's
Yeah.
always good to have something like that just catches you off guard and says,
It's a great little story.
It's a great story.
And I view it as, I know that this sounds terribly cliche, but it's, evidence that it really is a small world after all.
oh.
Just like the really bad ride at Magic Kingdom.
I was just going to say, that's your second Disney comment in this one episode. Dr. Joe, thank you so much.
My pleasure as always.
Really good conversation. Do not forget to continue to send your questions in. They come directly to me at askoursuperintendent@gmail.com. And of course, you have other ways to reach out to Dr. Joe, but this is just my silly way of saying, let's have some conversation and learn what he's really dealing with and what he's thinking about. So thank you for joining me, and I'll